Thanks to all the people who were patient enough to wait for this video, and also a big shout out to my new patrons, Daniel Morel and Mojo El Diablo. Also, if you haven't seen the first 2 episodes in this series, make sure you click up here to watch them as well. Now, throughout their discography, the Mars Volta have given fans meticulously thought out prog concept albums with stories that people never forget and an innovative energy that few other bands could match. But in 2009, the Mars Volta released an album that a lot of fans feared. We wanted to make the opposite of all the records we've done. All along we've threatened people that would make a pop record, and now we have. Omar is known for juggling different projects at the same time, so Octahedron was something he started working on back in 2007 when he was still working on the Bedlam in Goliath. But because of the mishaps, particularly his flooded studio, he decided to focus on one thing at a time after all. Now, no matter how much you're looking for an overarching story or concept in Octahedron, you won't find anything. They wanted to make a concept album to begin with, but as Cedric mentioned in an interview, I thought it was going to be a concept album, but never really got around to writing about anything in particular. Just a lot of instant song composing and regular themes that I wouldn't even want to elaborate on. Kidnappings, vanishings, what-if scenarios about how to get Republicans out of the White House if they got in. Later, he has elaborated on his lyrics, saying that he wanted to create something that reflected the Latin culture. Vanishings, kidnappings, and stealing was a part of everyday life in some parts of the Latin culture, and it still is some places to this day. And since both Omar and Cedric lived in El Paso, right across the border from Mexico, they would often hear such stories growing up as kids and teenagers. But it wasn't only their music that became more simplistic at this point. Cedric's lyrics, although still quite vague at times, became more literal. Personally, I feel like I'm able to imagine some very clear scenarios in my mind when listening to this, as opposed to previous albums where Cedric uses his lexical gymnastic skills from start to finish. Now, moving on, we find the band's 6th album, Noctourniquet. It was released in 2012 and is yet another album without any specific concept or story to follow. But what's interesting about the album nonetheless is that it's a piece of music that's connected to all sorts of different ideas. They seem very thought through, but Cedric is very hesitant to sharing the full story, as always. For example, the album title, Noctourniquet, is attached to a story that Cedric was writing at the time of the album's creation. The story was called The Boy with the Knives in His Voice, and the title of this story actually appears in several of the songs on the album. For example, the 7th track, In Absentia, the lyrics most likely refer to a young boy who was very timid, who had a very hard time talking to other kids. And because of that, people treated him as an outsider and didn't give him much love. The title, or even the story, is also referred to in the 8th track, Imago. But instead of continuing with the third-person perspective, it's a first-person observation. Maybe Cedric was talking about himself all along. Now, the lyrics are filled with a lot of different stories, like I told you, like this one. But the theme that seems to return over and over again throughout the album is religious stories. And Cedric is very inclusive. He writes about everything from Hinduism and Christian martyrs to Roman gods and Greek mythology. Somehow he ties these stories into his own narratives and creates his own original stories from these. One story that stands out in particular is found in Dyslexicon.
The main character he has an older brother that has passed away, and his older brother's trying to contact him, so I used the Greek mythology of Hyacinth, where Apollo's favorite was struck down, and when he was struck down and killed, he came back to life as the hyacinth flower. So in the story I wrote, the brother is trying to get a hold of the main character by constantly growing back in his front yard and, you know, always grabbing his attention.
As mentioned, he uses the story of Hyacinth from Greek mythology to repaint the story of two brothers. The older brother lost his little brother, and every day the little brother lives on as a flower in the older brother's backyard, trying to grab his attention. You can see the references to flowers in words like pistil, stem, and chloroform. But other than that, it's really hard to find a clear narrative because Cedric's writing style is very cryptic. The original myth that he took inspiration from goes like this. Hyacinth was the lover of the Greek god Apollo, but Hyacinth had another admirer, the god of the west winds, Zephyrus. Envious of Apollo, Zephyrus made a plan to kill Hyacinth. So one day, Apollo and Hyacinth took turns throwing the discus, and when it was Hyacinth's turn to catch it, he was struck by the discus and died. And it is believed that Zephyrus, who was the wind after all, made it fall straight down on his head. In grief, Apollo made a deal with Hades not to take his soul to the underworld, and instead made him into a flower with the remains of his blood. But these mythological and religious stories actually reflect a deeper topic that is also discussed on this album, the hardship of simply living. Where the children should be seen, not heard, was a strong phrase in particular that Cedric highlighted in an interview right after the record was released.
You know, the term where children should be seen, not heard, and how a lot of people suffer from being under the will of parents, really.
He thinks a lot of people fail to live a good life because people enact the neurotic tendencies of their parents. And the person who enacts those tendencies on the child holds what he calls the whip hand. Why Cedric chose to shed light on this might be because he sees a part of his parents' personality traits in himself that he personally don't like. Maybe he sees it as a weakness. Now, we talked a bit about the album's lyrics, but what about the music itself? So their intention going into this was that they wanted to explore new territory, and a lot of fans would agree that's the case. With Noctourniquet, the band replaced their long-winded, expansive song structures with more simplistic hard rock and pop-inspired structures. And this created a lot of polarity between the fans. Some fans really loved the album.
I'm feeling a decent to strong 7 on this thing. Thought it was really good.
Others hated it.
Noctourniquet, shit. Most of the Mars Volta stuff is brilliant and I love it.
Regarding Noctourniquet's more simplistic style, Rodriguez-Lopez noted, "For myself, it was definitely keeping things concise. At first I had the rule that I was only gonna play 4 notes per song, but that kind of went away after a while. But it was definitely about limiting the guitar and just taking all those parts and arranging them for other instruments, mainly the keyboard." But despite of Omar noting that there's more focus on leveling the use of instruments and taking the keyboard more into consideration, I personally still associate this record with loads of catchy riffs. They're incredibly simple, but through that simplicity, Omar is still able to channel forth the same vibrant energy that you can hear on some of their more complex efforts. This song in particular really reminds me of some early King Crimson or maybe Pink Floyd stuff. It's very psychedelic and edgy. And then you have the 9th track on the album, Moloch Walker, and the riff here is just so chaotic and sporadic, but at the same time so catchy and driving at the same time. But what really stands out to me on this record, and really all of their records in general, is that the Mars Volta have always been really good at creating some out-of-this-world sounding drum tracks. And yeah, I know that a lot of you guys are probably gonna say, John Theodore was the best drummer! I get it. A lot of you guys think that he was the most fantastic drummer on the planet Earth. Maybe John is their best drummer, but Thomas Pridgeon did some fantastic stuff too. And on this record, I think their new drummer, D'Anthony Parks, did it again. His drum fills and patterns really made me think when I first put this record on. Regarding his contributions, Rodriguez-Lopez noted, he sort of does away with all the cliches that I've come to accept over the years with drummers. I gave him way more freedom than I'd given any other drummer. I've had to wrestle with drummers, wrestle with musicians, to get them to understand my technique. But I don't think we did more than 2 takes on anything, and we usually took his first take. And if we did more than that, it was merely for my own enjoyment, because I was blown away by what I was hearing. It seems like in relation to working with Parks, Omar was able to open up to the idea of not being in control of what the musicians were supposed to create. In the past, he's had a very strict creative process that he leads his collaborators through when making a record, something that would end up in conflicts at certain times. Now, talking about the recording of the album, most of it was finished back in 2009, right after they finished mixing Octahedron. Omar has always been very prolific in terms of writing music. He's already got a massive catalog of solo albums, which makes you wonder if he's got the same work ethic as Frank Zappa. But the vocalist, Cedric, didn't have the same drive to create music as Omar at this point. In an interview, he explained that he was really taking his time with Noctourniquet. He was trying to quit his bad habits and get back into a better groove, something that eventually led to him working harder and being more enthusiastic about putting more songs on the record.
I really pushed. The album was ready and I was like, we have to put that song on, we have to. Got to the studio, listened to my old takes, and I'm like, can't put that out there. So I redid everything.
Now, as a little conclusion, Rodriguez-Lopez described the album as the end of an era in terms of how he personally directs his band members through recording contributions. But hopefully it's not the end of the band as we know it. It's been 6 years since they released Noctourniquet, and during February of this year, Baxler Zavala confirmed on Twitter that the Mars Volta would be back soon after they'd finished touring for their other band at the drive-in. So that was the third and final part of the Mars Volta series. I really hope you enjoyed this. Thank you so much for watching. And also a huge shout out again to my patrons. Without you guys, I wouldn't be able to run this YouTube channel. Now, if you want to become a patron as well, make sure you click this button right here. By becoming a patron, you actually gain access to so many awesome perks. You get to request future videos, you gain early access to my videos way before they're uploaded on this channel, and so much more. So make sure you check it out, and I'll talk to you soon, right? Take care, bye.